I never thought my life would turn into something out of a movie, not when it started so normal in New York City. My name is Jayden Morales, and I was 17 years old, a typical guy living in a small apartment in Queens with my mom and my stepfather, Rick. My days were pretty much like any other kid's. Wake up, go to high school, try to pay attention in class, maybe hang out with friends after, then head home for dinner. My mom worked hard, always had, and she was my everything. Her laughter was the best sound in the world, like wind chimes on a summer day. Rick, my stepfather, he was different. He was always quiet, always watching, and often had this way of looking at me like I was a problem to be solved, not a person. He worked in finance, something about numbers and stocks, and he always seemed to think he was smarter than everyone else, especially me. I tried to be good, I really did. I kept my grades up, helped around the house, and even started fiddling with some basic computer code I learned online at the public library just for fun. I thought it was cool, building something from nothing with just words and logic, and I'd spend hours on it, losing myself in the glowing screen. Rick, though he saw it as me being lazy, wasting time when I should be out earning money, even though I was still in high school and focused on graduating. He'd make snide remarks at the dinner table about how my little computer games wouldn't pay the bills, and my mom would try to smooth things over, but I could see the worry lines around her eyes, the way she'd flinch when Rick's voice got sharp. The night everything changed, it was just like any other Tuesday. I had a test the next day, so I was in my room trying to make sense of a complicated history lesson, but my mind kept drifting back to a small coding project I was working on, an idea for a simple budgeting app that would help people track their money. Rick walked in without knocking, his shadow filling the doorway, and he had this cold, hard look on his face, a look that always made my stomach clench. He held up a piece of paper, a printout of my grades from school, and even though my grades were mostly A's and B's, he zoomed in on one B- I had gotten in algebra. "What is this, Jayden?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "A B-? Are you kidding me? This is what happens when you spend all your time on that ridiculous computer nonsense instead of real work. You're lazy, a drain on this family, and you're never going to amount to anything." My heart started to pound against my ribs. I tried to explain that it was just one grade, that I was working hard, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept going, his words like sharp little knives. He called me a good-for-nothing, a freeloader, and then he said the words that shattered my world. "You know what? I'm tired of carrying dead weight. This isn't your home anymore. You're old enough to figure things out. Get out." My mom rushed into the room then, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Rick, no. You can't be serious. He's just a kid," she pleaded, but he just pushed her gently aside. "He's 17. He's a man now. He can stand on his own 2 feet. This is for his own good." He walked over to my closet, pulled out my old backpack, and started shoving my clothes into it. My favorite hoodie, my worn-out sneakers, a couple of t-shirts, just a few things. He even took my small, cheap laptop that I'd saved up for and tossed it on the bed, saying, "You can have this useless toy." He made it sound like a curse. I stood there, frozen, watching him pack my life into a bag, my mom crying silently in the corner, looking at me with a desperate, helpless look that I couldn't bear. She tried to grab my arm, but Rick ushered me towards the door. "Go on," he said, his voice cold and final. "You have 5 minutes to get out, or I'll call the police for trespassing." I couldn't believe it was happening. One minute I was a kid with a home, the next I was being thrown out into the night, my mom's sobbing goodbyes echoing behind me as the lock clicked shut, trapping me outside in the cold hallway, the heavy silence of the closed door pressing down on me. I only had that small backpack and my cheap laptop, the only things I could truly call my own. The first night was a blur of cold and fear. I didn't know where to go. I just walked, the city lights blurring through my tear-filled eyes. I ended up at a bus terminal, just sitting on a cold, hard bench, trying to make myself invisible. Every person who walked by felt like a threat. My stomach growled with hunger, but I didn't have a single dollar in my pocket, just my ID and my worn-out cell phone with a dying battery. I tried calling my mom, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, leaving desperate messages, begging her to answer, begging her to let me back in. Each unanswered call felt like another brick thrown at my heart. I even tried calling some distant relatives, my aunt, my uncle, hoping someone would take me in, but the phone rang and rang, or they picked up and their voices were guarded stiff. My aunt told me that Rick had called her, spinning some story about how I was troubled, disrespectful, even stealing from them, which was a complete lie. She said, "Jayden, I'm so sorry, but we just can't get involved. It sounds like you need to learn a lesson." Her voice was cold, distant, completely unlike the warm, loving aunt I remembered. It was like Rick had already poisoned the well, making sure no one would help me. My world felt like it was crumbling into a million tiny pieces. I tried to go back to the apartment building the next morning, hoping my mom would answer, but Rick was waiting. He opened the door, his face grim. "I told you to leave, Jayden," he said, his eyes narrowed. "If you don't go now, I'm calling the police. I won't have you disturbing your mother." He looked directly at me, a cruel smirk on his face, like he was enjoying every second of my misery. I saw my mom peering over his shoulder, her eyes red and puffy, looking away when our eyes met. It was then that I realized he had her trapped too, maybe not physically, but emotionally, financially. I was on my own. I spent the next few weeks bouncing between different homeless shelters across the city. Each one was a blur of noise, strange faces, and the constant smell of disinfectant and stale food. There was no privacy, no peace. I'd share a bunk bed with a dozen other men, some muttering to themselves, some coughing through the night, some just staring blankly at the ceiling. Sleep was a luxury I rarely got, always half awake, clutching my backpack with my meager belongings, terrified of someone stealing my laptop or the few clothes I had. The days were long, a monotonous cycle of searching for food, for work, for a place to be warm. I started doing odd jobs, anything I could find. Dishwashing in a greasy spoon restaurant, scrubbing floors in a diner, lugging heavy boxes for a few dollars cash. It was back-breaking work, my hands raw, my body aching. But it was enough to buy a cheap, greasy meal and maybe a subway ride to a different part of the city, just to escape the feeling of being stuck. Every day felt like a fight for survival, a constant reminder of how low I had fallen. The public library became my sanctuary. It was warm, quiet, and most importantly, it had free computers and internet. I would spend hours there, pretending to be a regular student, burying my head in books, especially programming textbooks. I remembered the simple coding I had done before, and now it felt like a lifeline. I taught myself more advanced languages, devouring information, practicing every chance I got. It was slow going. Sometimes I'd have to leave because the library was closing, or I couldn't find an available computer. Sometimes I'd fall asleep at the table, waking up to the gentle nudge of a librarian. But it was there in the quiet corners of those old libraries that I started to build something new, not just code, but a new version of myself. I learned about building websites, about creating apps, about the world of technology. It was a world away from the shelters and the dishwashing, a place where my mind could escape and build. I started taking on small freelance jobs I found online, building simple websites for small businesses, earning just enough to rent a tiny room in a shared apartment, a place with 4 other guys, but it was my own space. A door that locked, a bed that was always mine. It was a huge step up from the shelters, a glimmer of hope that kept me going. I saved every penny, poured every spare moment into learning, into coding, into dreaming. The memory of Rick's sneering face, of my mom's helpless tears, it fueled me, hardening my resolve. I wouldn't just survive, I would thrive. I would show them. Years passed, years of grinding, years of learning, years of pushing myself beyond what I thought was possible. The tiny room turned into a slightly bigger apartment than a small office space. My freelance work grew, and I started building a small team. The idea for the Fintech app, the one I had toyed with in my high school bedroom, never left me. I remembered how impossible it felt to get a bank account, to build credit, to even rent an apartment when I had nothing, when I was 17 and homeless. I wanted to create something that would help young people, especially those from low-income backgrounds, navigate that confusing financial world. Something that would give them a fair shot at building a future. It was a passion project, born from my own pain, and it consumed me. I poured every ounce of my energy, every dollar I earned, into developing it. There were countless rejections from investors who didn't see the vision, who thought it was too niche, too risky. I faced skepticism and closed doors more times than I could count, and there were days I almost gave up, days where the old doubts, the echoes of Rick's words, would whisper in my head. But then I'd remember the cold bus terminal, the hunger, the feeling of being completely alone, and that memory would reignite the fire in my belly. I knew this app could change lives because it was built from my own experience. Finally, after years of relentless work, of pitching, of tweaking, of believing, I found investors who saw the potential, who believed in my story and my vision. We launched the app, and it took off faster than I could have dreamed. It truly helped people, and the feedback was incredible. We started small, but the user base grew exponentially, spreading by word of mouth among the very communities we aimed to serve. The company grew too, expanding from a small team in a cramped office to a vibrant workplace buzzing with talented people. My Fintech app was doing exactly what I set out to do, changing finance for low-income youth, making it easier for them to build credit, to open bank accounts, to understand money, giving them a real shot at economic freedom. I was 28 now, an adult, a CEO, and I had built everything from nothing, brick by brick, line of code by line of code. Just a few months ago, we closed our Series B funding round, raising an incredible $45 million. It was a mind-boggling amount, a validation of everything I had worked for, everything I had endured. My company was a success, a real, tangible success, and I had done it all on my own terms. I hadn't gone back, I hadn't begged, I had just kept moving forward, building. I didn't think about my old family much anymore, not directly. The pain had dulled, replaced by a fierce sense of independence and a focus on my work. But a part of me deep down knew this day would come. I had made sure of it. I had given an exclusive interview to the New York Times, one of the biggest newspapers in the world, and I had carefully, deliberately shared my story, not with anger, but with a quiet strength. I talked about being kicked out at 17, about sleeping in shelters, about teaching myself to code in public libraries. I didn't name names, but I knew who would read it. I knew who would connect the dots. I wanted the world to know, and more importantly, I wanted them to know not from a whisper or a rumor, but from the front page of a newspaper, undeniable and loud. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 11 years to the day I was thrown out. I was in my sleek office, sipping coffee, the hum of my successful company around me, when my phone buzzed with an alert. The New York Times was out. I clicked on the link, and there it was, my face, large and clear on the front page. The headline screamed, "The ex-homeless founder who just raised millions to change finance." The article detailed my journey from the streets to the boardroom, highlighting my mission to help others like my younger self. It didn't mention Rick by name, but it described the stepfather who kicked me out at 17 for being lazy, the mother who couldn't intervene, and the cold night on the streets of Queens. It was all there, a quiet, devastating testament to my past, now laid bare for everyone to see. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a deep satisfaction, a quiet triumph, but also a lingering ache from the memories. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just took a deep breath, and then I opened my LinkedIn app. I posted a short, simple message for all my connections to see and for the world to find. You don't need to go back to where you were. They'll eventually find out where you've been. I knew who that message was truly for. Across the city, in a modest house in Queens, my cousin Maria was having her morning coffee, flipping through the New York Times just like she did every day. Her eyes scanned the headlines, and then they stopped. They widened. She gasped so loud her own coffee spilled. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jayden, is that Jayden?" My mom was in the kitchen, making breakfast, humming a tune. Maria ran to her, the newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. "Aunt Sarah, look at this." My mom, curious, took the paper, her eyes scanning the familiar face, then the headline, then the words below. The color drained from her face, her hands went slack, and the newspaper fluttered to the floor. "Jayden," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, before her knees buckled and she fainted, collapsing onto the kitchen floor. The clatter of her fall brought Rick rushing in from the dining room, a piece of toast halfway to his mouth. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice gruff. He saw my mom on the floor and Maria standing over her, pale and shaking, pointing at the newspaper. Rick picked up the paper, annoyance turning to confusion as he saw the headline, then the photo. His eyes widened, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. He read a few lines, his gaze darting to the description of the lazy kid, the kicked out at 17. His jaw worked, a sound of disbelief escaping his throat. He took a bite of his egg, a big, sloppy bite, and then he started to choke. Violently. The sound of his gasping, the thudding of his fists against his chest, filled the kitchen as he struggled to clear his throat, his face red and contorted. Maria, crying now, tried to help my mom while Rick wheezed and coughed, the front page story a silent bomb exploding in their quiet, comfortable lives. The news spread like wildfire through our family, through Rick's small social circle. People who had always treated Rick with deference, who thought he was a successful, upstanding man, suddenly started looking at him with suspicion, with questions in their eyes. His golf buddies started avoiding his calls. His church group, where he was a well-known figure, suddenly seemed less eager to have him speak. The whispers followed him everywhere. The story wasn't just about my success. It was about the cruelty of my past, a past he was directly responsible for. His comfortable life, built on a facade of respectability, began to crack. He even tried to call me, his voice oozing with false warmth. "Jayden, my boy, I always knew you had it in you. That tough love, it really worked, didn't it? We should talk, maybe I could offer some business advice." I listened to his pathetic attempts to spin the narrative, to try and latch onto my success, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I simply told him, "Rick, I'm not interested in business advice or any kind of advice from you. You made your choices, I made mine. We have nothing to talk about." And then I hung up, blocking his number. My mom, after recovering from her faint, sent me a frantic email, then text messages, then a letter, handwritten, tear-stained. She begged me to meet her, just her, alone. She said she had made a terrible mistake, that she loved me, that she hated herself for not protecting me, for not standing up to Rick. For years, I had held on to the bitterness, the feeling of abandonment, even from her. But now, seeing her desperation, I felt a flicker of something else, a quiet curiosity. I agreed to meet her, not at my office, not at her house, but at a neutral coffee shop in a quiet part of the city. When she saw me, she burst into tears, her face etched with years of regret and pain. She looked so much older, so much frailer than I remembered. She talked for a long time about how Rick had manipulated her, how he had controlled their finances, how she felt trapped and powerless. She told me she had finally left him, moved into a small apartment of her own. The article, my success, had given her the courage, she said, to see him for what he truly was and to finally break free. She wasn't just apologizing for not helping me back then. She was apologizing for her entire life with him, for letting him diminish her and everyone around them. The twist was this. I didn't want anything from her, not an apology for Rick, not an explanation. I just wanted my mom back, the mom who used to laugh like wind chimes, the one Rick had silenced. I told her that I forgave her, not for Rick's actions, but for her own inaction, for allowing herself to be controlled. I told her that she deserved to be happy, to be free. I even offered to help her financially to make sure she was comfortable. She refused the money, saying she wanted to stand on her own 2 feet too, just like I had. But she hugged me, a long, tight hug, and it felt like a lifetime of hurt finally starting to melt away. Rick, I heard, was completely isolated. He lost his social standing, his supposed friends, and now he had lost the one person who had stayed by his side through everything. He was left with nothing but his own bitter company, his carefully constructed life in ruins, all because a newspaper article, a single LinkedIn post, revealed the truth of who he was and what he had done. My revenge wasn't just about his downfall. It was about my own rise, about building something meaningful from the ashes, and about finally, truly, reclaiming my life and my mother on my own terms. My past was no longer a wound. It was the foundation of my greatest triumph and my future, a testament to what I could achieve, even when kicked out with $40 and nowhere to go.